Hello and welcome to this week's Medicinal Monday on the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Susanna.
And I'm Dr. Ben.
And we're both naturopathic doctors that empower individuals to heal themselves and reverse disease through whole food plant-based nutrition and mind-body medicine.
So we have recorded a number of podcast episodes in the past talking about gut health, and we're at it again. Really, I guess we could spend our entire podcast talking about the gut, and I'm sure there are numerous podcasts already that are devoted to gut health and function. But of course, we're making our way into the gut as we're working the way from head to toe, altering your health all along the way. And we thought it would be helpful to maybe just kind of distill all the essential information down, because let's face it, there's tons that we could talk about with regard to gut health and function, and things get pretty complicated and complex pretty quickly. And I feel like one of our roles, or maybe our strengths, I don't know how well we're doing at it, but our goal at least is to really distill the information down, make it more practical, digestible, I guess no pun intended there, and things that really just are things that you can do and action steps that you can take to actually make a difference in your life. Not just like bombard you with information. Oh my God, all this stuff. What do I do with it? So anyways, without further ado, let's talk about digestive health and function. And we talked about the stomach last week, and on last week's episode of Medicinal Monday, which is, we talk about kind of the upper digestive tract and the lower digestive tract. And then, of course, the lower digestive tract can be broken down into the small intestine, which has multiple parts, and the large intestine, which has multiple parts, and the colon and the anus and the rectum and all that kind of stuff. But
not to mention the other organs that are included in the digestive system, like the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder.
Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we'll get there.
Oh, yeah, we do need some episodes on those organs.
I think so. But we're talking about the gut tube, specifically the lower gut tube, and we do like to think about it as a tube. I think it helps me to consider how important this part of our body is when we just consider what it is. Classically people talk about the human body as kind of being like a donut, and this inside of our body, we've got this tube from our mouth to our anus. That's essentially the outside world, and the integrity of that lining is just as important as the integrity of your skin. You wouldn't want like just some porous skin that's just absorbing all the stuff, and you don't know what's going in, what's going on it, what's, the microbiome and the environment on that skin. You want to be mindful of what you're putting on your skin. And we have a skin inside of our digestive tract. In fact, the skin of our digestive tract is much more sensitive, you could say delicate, vulnerable, being that it's just one single cell layer, as opposed to our epidermis on our skin, which is multiple layers. So we've got the single cell layer lining our stomach, our small intestine, our large intestine, and that layer of cells is directly interfacing with the outside world, just like this layer of cells on our skin.
Yes. And so as a quick kind of physiology review as to what these organs do for us, the small intestine, once the food has been digested by the stomach, it's then transferred to the small intestine. It goes through a sphincter called the pyloric sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. And that food stuff is met with pancreatic enzymes secreted from the pancreas. It's met with bile secreted from the liver and the gallbladder. And that food is further digested into smaller and smaller food molecules that are then absorbed in the small intestine. They simply move across that single cell layer that is the lining of our gut into our bloodstream. Yeah. And so when we think of small intestine, we think mainly of absorption of nutrition.
Totally. So a lot of times digestion is talking about the processes of, yes, digestion, breaking down of nutrients into their smallest parts. But digestion, as far as like practicality is concerned, it also involves absorption of those nutrients, because what good do those nutrients do if they don't make their way into our bloodstream and then circulate into our body? And then there's, of course, the assimilation of those nutrients based on the bioavailability of what we're consuming, what we're absorbing, and putting it to use in the body.
But maybe a really important point while we're talking about physiology of the small intestine is that in order for the nutrients to be absorbed in our small intestine, they really do have to be broken down into their most simple forms. So when we think of carbohydrates, we think of monosaccharides like glucose and fructose, for example.
Which is single sugar, simple sugar. Yeah.
Right. When we think of proteins, we think of single amino acids that are absorbed. When we think of fats, we think of fatty acids that can be absorbed. If the molecules don't get broken down into those small, most basic forms, then they're not going to be absorbed across the lining of our gut, and they're going to end up staying in the gut and causing some issues. And we're going to talk about some of the most common gut issues that I'm sure you all are probably familiar with as well.
Yeah. So it's, commonly said that these macronutrients are broken down kind of with like scissors into their smallest units, fatty acids, amino acids, and simple sugars. And these kind of scissors that break them down are, of course, our different digestive enzymes, our lipases breaking down the fats, and the proteases breaking down the proteins, and the amylases breaking down the sugars, the carbohydrates. And then talking about the small intestine a little bit more, the small intestine is called the small intestine because it's smaller in diameter than the large intestine. But in fact, your small intestine is huge. It's about, 12 to 15 or 18 feet long, and, winding and being, all jammed in your belly. And what's more astonishing than the sheer length of your small intestine wrapped up inside your belly is the surface area of that intestine through projections that are called villi, like little finger-like projection that increase the surface area, and then microvilli, micro finger-like projections that increase the surface area further. And so the surface area of all the small intestines and the villi and the microvilli is more than an acre. And I don't know if you've ever, what your property looks like, but an acre property, that's like a good sized property. That's like a small little farm. So you have a small little farm inside just your small intestine. And of course, that big amount of surface area is really an essential, key for optimizing the absorptive potential within our gut, but also it's back to that balance of like absorption, but also vulnerability. So that big amount of surface area is also more vulnerable to toxins, to, antibiotics, to chemicals that disrupt and irritate that lining. And as we'll talk about, hopefully we'll get to, I'm sure we will, the microbes that live on the lining of our intestines, our microbiome.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, maybe just a little small section talking about physiology of the colon, because once we absorb all the nutrition from the food stuff in the small intestine, what is left over? Mostly fiber, the undigestible foods.
And water.
And water, thank you. And so the colon is rich in so many beneficial microbes, and their role is to break down that fiber, to ferment that fiber. And in that process of fermenting the fiber, our beneficial microbes actually produce wonderful anti-inflammatory and healing compounds for the gut lining.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, intestinal microbiome and diversity is so important. But also what happens in the colon is absorption of water. And so we're kind of creating a more concentrated stool that is eventually going to be passed. Basically, everything that the body doesn't need is left in the stool and then eliminated through the rectum and the anus.
Ideally, unless we have issues of maldigestion, malabsorption, then you'll see stuff in your stool. And of course, classically, corn, like the whole of the corn, for whatever reason, isn't, it's fiber. It's not digested, broken down by our enzymes, and the microbes don't really get to it either. But interestingly, if we eat, this is just a tangent, but if we eat raw, uncooked corn, that actually preserves natural enzymes. we won't see the corn husk, or not the husk, the corn kernel, the corn hull in our stool, because it'll self-digest. So it's really only cooked corn that we see in our stool. But and I bring that up because that's not a sign of maldigestion, malabsorption. But if we're seeing other undigested food stuff and, fat and globs and mucus and stuff, obviously signs that maybe our digestive health and absorptive potential isn't optimal. So maybe is it time to shift gears to talk about optimizing that digestive process, or anything else that we need to cover?
I mean, I think maybe first, like, what can go wrong in the gut? Because we talked about, when food doesn't get broken down properly into those simple molecules so that they can be absorbed, they're left in the gut. They can cause fermentation and putrefaction. They can also lead to issues with our microbial balance because those foods aren't being properly digested. So if we don't have good stomach acid, or we don't have good stomach health.
Well, I wanted to get there when we talk about optimizing digestive health.
Okay, so I'm jumping the gun.
Yeah, I mean, so you were talking about what goes wrong. So what goes wrong?
Yeah.
Like you're in the putrefaction and the fermentation, if you understand like the process, these processes, what we create are like gases, and gases are gas. So we experience gases as gas in our abdomen, and that of course healthfully can pass and without any pain or discomfort. But of course, if we have kind of chronic manifestation of gas from fermentation and putrefaction, then our gas isn't healthy. Maybe it's more stinky and more rancid in that way, but it's also going to be distending our abdomen and kind of irritating our abdomen. And we're going to have
irritating the gut lining,
the lining, and we're going to have cramping. We're going to have symptoms. So that's all to say that, some amount of a little gas can be totally normal, totally healthy, not a sign of digestive issues or anything like that. But chronically, and of course, different flavors of gas and the pain, that's not normal, right?
Right.
So what else can go wrong with digestion? Of course, we can have change. What did you want to talk about? I mean, there's all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it all depends on how we want to structure this conversation. But I mean, maybe it'd be helpful to talk about the other things that can harm our gut lining, because you probably all heard the term leaky gut.
And I think that this again kind of takes us to healing the gut, because of course we know that the first thing we need to do, hopefully we know the first thing we need to do is just remove the obstacles.
Well, then why don't we go to healing the gut?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you already started talking about the stomach acid, and the first and important thing to consider in kind of this principle for optimizing digestive function is starting from the top down. A lot of people are just like, oh, let's put in some probiotics and see what happens. Let's put in some digestive enzymes and see what happens. But we have to start from the top down, top down meaning, yes, we've got this tube and things are running through this tube from the mouth into the stomach, into the lower digestive tract, etc. But before we enter the tube, the top of the top is, of course, our state of mind. And our state of mind, whether being in a state of stress or peace and gratitude, is going to dictate our autonomic nervous system function. So if we're in a state of stress, of course, we know that sympathetic nervous system shuts down digestive process, shuts down digestive function. Then, of course, grounded, normal, natural, healthy, peaceful presence, we optimize our rest and digest function of our autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. So before we even start eating, we have an opportunity to start healing our gut by just switching the flip of our nervous system functioning. And that's, from my perspective, unless we got to start there. Again, this is the place to start. If we're not starting there, then everything that we're doing downstream is not going to really matter, because our digestive system has the wrong nervous system inputs into it. So starting from the top down is so key. And of course, the top of the top is our state of mind, and having compassion and understanding with ourselves, of course, is key as well. Yeah. But then, of course, the mouth. Oftentimes you forget
Yes.
about the mouth.
Yes, the mouth and chewing. Is that
Mhm.
what you were referring to?
Is there anything else that you do with your mouth?
Yeah, so we want to make sure we're chewing our food optimally because that's going to really set up our downstream organs for success. So yeah, we want to chew thoroughly. We don't want to be eating while we're distracted. We don't want to be just gulping down big chunks of food.
Yeah, we got then that just leaves more. We need more enzymes. We need more stuff going on in our stomach and lower digestive tract.
It's more taxing.
So that's the upper digestive tract, or that's the mouth. And then last week we talked all about stomach acid optimization, digestive bitters, eating properly in terms of not too many high fat, high protein foods that are going to put a strain on our stomach acid function.
Go watch the replay.
Don't need to do a recap. And then that makes our way to the lower digestive tract. Like how do we optimize the health and function of the lower digestive tract? And this is where the whole microbiome conversation comes into play. And yeah.
But first, before microbiome, I just want to really talk about some of the compounds that we can ingest that directly cause harm and damage to our delicate gut lining. Things like, alcohol and certain medications like NSAIDs are very, very directly inflammatory to our gut lining. So those are some things, we definitely would want to, minimize if we do have gut issues, but also considering some of the other actual foods.
What about antibiotics? I mean, and we think about like pharmaceutical antibiotics, like, okay, sometimes you can't avoid taking a course of pharmaceutical antibiotics, but there's antibiotics that are everywhere in our environment,
right?
In our food, in our air, in our water, specifically, herbicides and pesticides. The way that herbicides and pesticides work is that they kill life. That is the definition of an antibiotic. So avoiding exposure to herbicides, pesticides, other heavy metals and toxins that kill life. When you kill life, you also kill life in the gut. And of course, we're talking about the microbiome, which yes, and
that's exactly what I was pointing to, focusing on whole foods that are organic, because the more processed foods we eat, the more conventionally grown foods we eat, the more we're going to be exposing our gut to those environmental toxins, herbicides, pesticides, but also the other weird chemicals that are added to processed foods as preservatives and such.
So of course we're kind of beating around this bush of the microbiome. And the microbiome, the way that, it's so complex and so over my head, and no, I don't think we'll ever fully understand the complexity and amazing dynamic nature of the microbiome. But the way I think about and what helps me consider what a healthy microbiome is just looking out the window into the world. And, you see the trees, you see the grass, you see, hopefully you see some trees and grass somewhere out when you look out the window. But when you look into nature, essentially, a way to measure the health of a natural ecosystem is by measuring the diversity of plant life, of animal life, of insect life. The same way we measure the health of soil is measuring diversity of microbes in that soil, et cetera. So a healthy microbiome in our intestines, in our body, is really one that is biodiverse, the same principle that exists all throughout nature. So a biodiverse microbiome is one that, of course, multiple strains and harmony interacting with one another. And of course, that lends to this idea like, oh, well, should I dump some probiotics in there? Should I dump some beneficial microbes in there to try to establish balance? And it turns out it's really hard to do that. Like back to the metaphor of nature, like when we try to, if there's too many birds, and it's like, why are there so many birds? Oh, we need to shoot the birds or something. I don't know.
Or we need to introduce a specific predator for that bird, you know?
Maybe that's a better example. Not shoot the bird, maybe shoot, but yeah.
There's too many deers, we need to introduce wolves or whatever,
But then that throws off all the other, then there you have less deer, so you have less the stuff that the deer eat. And of course, I'm not ecologist, but
It's hard to micromanage nature.
It's hard to micromanage nature, especially in the human gut. So the best thing that we can do is just put in the raw materials and let nature manage itself. And the raw materials for our gut health are just whole plant foods, fiber rich whole plant foods. And it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And of course, a lot of people who have issues eating fiber, who have been on a lower carbohydrate diet, a higher fat, high protein diet, which is naturally low in carbohydrates, it's therefore naturally low in fibers. When they do start increasing their fiber intake, it's like they get gas and bloating, these signs and symptoms of digestive distress. And of course, those kind of signs and symptoms are just a natural phenomenon, a natural consequence of increasing fiber, because what's happening is we're putting a little strain, a little stress on the microbes that do exist. And I like to use the metaphor of like going to a gym, and we can't expect to have a strong muscle if we just go to the gym once and pick up a weight. If you walk into the gym and you start doing some squats for the first time in 6 months, the next day you're going to have some sore legs and you're going to be like, those weights hurt me. I'm never touching a weight again. The same is true for some people wrongfully when they, go out to a plant-based meal and they have a bunch of beans or a big salad or whatever it is. And it's like, oh man, so much gas, so much bloating. Those beans hurt me. I'm never touching a bean again. But the fact is we got to train our microbiome and adapt our microbiome and diversify our microbiome the same way we kind of train and strengthen our muscles when we walk into the gym. So, of course, this is all suggesting that this is a long game, that with no real finish line, because our microbiome is always evolving and adapting to meet the ever-changing environment that we are creating for it. So we want to be mindful of that environment. Of course, back to like the super important facts that you brought up around avoiding the exposure to antibiotics and herbicides, pesticides, toxins, etc. So that aspect of the environment, but then the environment in terms of providing the resources, the fuel, the kind of structure for these microbes to thrive and do what they're designed to do.
Right. Yeah. And the really cool thing about, if we were to kind of say that there is kind of like a goal or a finish line of diversifying the microbiome, it's simply to get your microbiome to a diverse enough state where you are receiving the benefits of that diversity. Because as we talked about a little bit earlier, these beneficial microbes, when they ferment the fibers, and ferment, we're using ferment in a good way,
I don't know if that's I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I'm not sure if that's the proper term.
Okay. Break down the fibers. So the natural byproduct of that is the production of very beneficial short chain fatty acids that are anti-inflammatory, that are protective against colon cancer. And also a healthy, diverse microbiome helps us to create a nice protective biofilm layer that coats our intestinal lining and protects us against things like environmental toxins, like pathogens that might slip into the food that we're eating, like bigger undigested food molecules. But if we don't have that protective biofilm, we're much more susceptible to having that gut inflammation that can lead to that intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut, where then we're setting ourselves up for getting some systemic inflammatory symptoms throughout the rest of our body, because health really does start in our gut.
Yeah. So wrapping up this conversation, of course, we're talking about shifting that microbiome that inhabits the intestines, but also all aspects of our body, and the way that we do that is just diversifying the intake of fiber-rich foods and playing that long game and being patient and compassionate with ourselves as we do so, knowing that as we put in different stuff, we're going to have different experiences. And the different experiences that we have, maybe it is a little bit of gas for a couple days or a couple weeks. That's not in and of itself a pathological state. That's just a normal consequence of shifting the inputs that are going in. But as we shift the inputs that are going into our mouth, we can consider all the top-down things, our mindset, our mouth and chewing, our stomach acid, digestive enzyme production, all these kind of things that we've talked about before. We can, focus on those sort of things so that when the food stuff gets into the intestines, our microbiome has the optimal chance to flourish given the inputs that it's receiving. And of course, don't give up, don't give up on your fiber-rich whole plant foods. When we do have, I don't know, like Suzanne and I, we both have kind of our foods that cause a little bit more bloating. I know for you,
foods that we don't eat very frequently.
I know for you, it's Brussels sprouts. It's like, oh man, I can, you can only tolerate 2 or 3 or 4 Brussels sprouts.
Because we eat them like 3 times a year. If we ate them regularly, then I'd be a Brussels sprout champion.
Yeah. So it's, again, an opportunity. Maybe we should eat them like rather than 2 or 3 times a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. And so the goal is really to diversify. Just like, I don't know, I guess people say the same thing about your financial health,
your portfolio,
financial portfolio. So your microbiome portfolio is as important as your financial portfolio in terms of diversification of your assets. Any other last words about digestion or about the lower intestinal tract and
we've got a lot
stuff? Oh my gosh,
we have a lot of other episodes as well, especially where we talk about specific conditions like SIBO and constipation and diarrhea, and
also the gut immune connection, which is so closely interconnected with this conversation.
We have a ton of episodes, so go check out our other GI related episodes if you're interested. But next week we'll just continue working down from head to toe for another Medicinal Monday here. And between now and then, if you're looking for more support, you can always head over to our website, www.alter.health, and check out all the different services that we have, the ways that we support individuals to get to their healing goals as soon as possible.
That's mainly Thrive on Plants.
Thrive on Plants, yes.
Yeah. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you guys next time.